Thank you so much, Shelli, for being with me today on the WaveCapital's guest speaker series on relationship building in a team environment. You're my 70th guest, milestone episode 70. Shelli, it's a pleasure to be with you. We've known each other for a long time. You've been one of my good friends and mentors, and uh, obviously a friend of my family's, and everybody always wishes you and Jerry well. And thank you so much for being with me.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm honored to be the 70th guest. Thank you for thinking of me.
Yes, absolutely. Shelli, when you think of relationship building in a team environment, what does relationship building mean to you? And what has it meant for your professional career?
Well, I really look at it through the lens of my upcoming book called An Interstellar Guide to Success. It's What Space Got to Do with It, An Interstellar Guide to Success, which has four main components: leadership, awareness, access, and action. And what you're talking about for building teams and creating that inter-department relationship really depends on leadership. The leader who may be in charge absolutely has a responsibility to build that teamwork, but each individual also has a responsibility for self leadership, not only for their self, but also in how they interact with others. So it really comes down to that leadership component.
Wonderful. And I love how you've always been instrumental, and it's really been the essence of your career from a relationship building perspective, holding a lot of different leadership positions and in various capacities. And as a former lieutenant colonel in the US Air Force, former chief operations officer of the Space Foundation, official member of the Forbes Technology Council, and you've held so many other titles, and you have been so successful in so many different endeavors. Whether you think of those positions you've held and when you think about your career in general, what does it tell you about you and how you've impacted the world and how the world has impacted you?
Well, that's a fabulous question. And again, I'm going to come back to that leadership component. It really is dependent on that first step of leadership. And my third book in the series that will come out next year, called What Space Got to Do with It, Out of This World Leadership, talks about just what you said. It's about being an inspirational leader, having authenticity, and then being grateful. Those are three key components that I've learned in my leadership journey, that I've also witnessed in other leaders that are leading not only the space industry, but industries around the world, countries around the world. Those three main components: be inspirational, be authentic, and have gratitude.
Absolutely. And when you look back at the beginning of your career and serving in our military, and again, I've always said this, and my audience, I'm sure at home, my listeners and viewers alike, appreciate your service. Thank you for your service, and just a lifetime of giving back to so many different communities across this country and around the world. You've had an impact pretty much everywhere you've been. So when you think about how your career started, talk to me about, with my audience listening in, what has it meant for you to live a life of service and in so many different capacities?
Well, thank you again. And I'm honored to have been a military service member. We're always still military service members, whether we're in uniform, retired, National Guard, Reserve. We're all part of the same team. And as you know, my husband was a firefighter for 30 years, so he's a first responder. So I consider him also that ethos of service before self, which is what we've all kind of understand. And that's what I agree to, is that service before self. How do we help others? And even as I transitioned my career from the military into being a global thought leader, it's how do I give back? How do I help others? And that's part of why I wrote this book series about what space got to do with it. Because I heard from so many people many of the same questions about how do I get into the space industry? Or how do I make transitions? Or how do I pivot? Or how do I do this? And I thought, you know what? I really need to take that on myself and create something that can help others in their journey. So when you start from a position of service before self, you always look through that lens of how can I give back. So I've always been giving back, whether I was in the military, serving as the chief operating officer at Space Foundation, and now in my role doing motivational speaking and writing books so that I can help the next generation of global leaders take their place.
Yes. And what made you want to pursue a path once you were already serving the military, but what attracted you about space? What did you love about exploring and understanding how space because when people think of space, I mean, they think about our 9 planets, or they think about the role of Earth, the planet Earth that we live on. But in terms of space, what does that tell you about relationship building? What should that tell my audience about relationship building? What space means, to us as human beings who live on planet Earth?
Well, the first thing we should start with is no one goes to space alone. It takes a team. For every astronaut that goes to space, there are thousands of people that are here on Earth that made that mission happen. So I think that's a key component for your audience is that we're not doing it alone. We're all part of a team, and that team is accomplishing goals and objectives. And obviously, it's a great goal to help put a man or woman on the moon. As we look to return to the moon and go on to Mars and beyond and become an interplanetary species. But we also look at how space benefits us here on Earth, with better weather prediction. We've had a lot of floods lately, droughts that are taking place that impacts agriculture, that impacts our food security. We also look at weather, the importance of pilots that are piloting planes. They need to know what the weather is so that they can avoid weather in their navigation routes. So, space is part of our everyday life in a way that's so integral. On average, your audience is connecting with a satellite 45 times a day. They don't even know it. Space is so interconnected in their daily lives. It's just like getting the mail or driving on the road. That's how common space is today.
And when you think of how space is so intertwined in whom we are and how we go about our day, and you talk about how we are interacting with satellites 45 times a day, which is an incredible number. Nobody really thinks about that. To your point, what does it tell us about where, as a society, as a human species, as the human species, what does it tell us about where life is going and how much more involved will space be in our lives going forward?
Well, there's two real ways to look at things. The first one is for those of us who are in developed countries, the United States, China, Russia, Europe, we're using space every day. Right now, you and I are using Zoom communication, and telecommunications was used and created by NASA to talk to astronauts. So we're talking just like they did talk to astronauts for the Apollo era. So and then that technology was commercialized. So much technology in our daily life is commercialized from the last 60 years of space exploration. So, as we continue to look at space and pursuing becoming an interplanetary species, someday having research centers and habitats on Mars, that technology is going to wrap back to Earth to making life better here on Earth, whether that's better pharmaceuticals and healthcare, agriculture. We're dependent on agriculture because of how GPS is tied in with the tractors that do precision agriculture. We have it for all our banking applications. They're running on the backbone of cyber and space security. I've already talked about no airplane takes off without GPS. So that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is there are billions of people on the planet who are still not connected to the global economy. Don't even think about space, just the global economy. They're mainly in remote island nations around the equator, and there's no way to lay fiber optic cable to them. That's what most of us are running on, fiber optic cable in the developed world. So the only way we can bring these island nations in remote parts of Africa and South America and so on around the equator is through space technology, satellite internet. And once we can bring those individuals into the global economy using space as the facilitator, we're going to increase their quality of life, their ability to have higher standards, their ability to have better weather forecasting, agriculture, raise their quality of life. So we need to look at it as there are two ways, those who are already using space, and then how do we bring the rest of humanity into the rest of the global economy using space technology as the enabler.
Yes. And I always find space technology, when you and I have discussed it and when I've read about it and what I know about it, and that's why having you on, because you're the expert, and it's really interesting. And in recent years, the Space Force was created. Another, arm of our US military is the Space Force. Talk to me about the role of the Space Force and what are things and what are ideas or what are priorities that the Space Force has that is an extension of the branch of military you served in, which is the US Air Force. So that would be something that my audience and I would love to know more about.
Well, wonderful. Well, as I said, I was in the U.S. Air Force. At that time, Space Force did not exist. And what I was doing was space procurement. And what that means is I was one of those people that actually purchased on behalf of the military and the government space technology. So that was satellites, rockets, ground stations, understanding telemetry and tracking and data and how that helps our daily lives, not only for the military, but we also were partnered with NASA, so civil space. And during that time, we didn't have this big boom yet in commercial space sector. So that's what I was doing when I was in the Air Force. And since I've retired from the Air Force, Space Force has stood up and they have taken on those roles. So there is procurement for the Space Force, just like I described, taking place satellites, rockets, ground stations. But they now have a bigger component. As a matter of fact, just this week, Space Force announced their interrelations and how they're going to work with other nations. So before it was kind of ad hoc, but now they've actually formalized it in a document. So for your listeners who are, whether you're in the United States or other countries, you want to know how to do business with Space Force, they just put out a document you can Google International Relations for Space Force and how they're going to partner. Because as I said, no one goes to space alone. We also can't do space alone because space is very expensive, it's dangerous. It is still, at the end of the day, rocket science and rocket scientists. So we need to work with our allies. We need to work with other partner nations, Australia, Japan, Europe. We're seeing the UAE making monumental leaps, wanting to put a research station, a scientific station on Mars in 100 years. So we need to work with our partners and allies because we have a lot of challenges in space. And I made a kind of a circle of the planet because, as you know, in addition to all the wonderful technology that those satellites is bringing us, we do have a lot of orbital debris. So we call it space junk that's circling the planet, and it is a threat to our satellites that are providing us information. Because think about any piece of orbital debris, the size of a fleck of paint is like a bullet traveling around in orbit. And if it hits a satellite, it could not only destroy it, but cause significant damage. And then there's a cascading event that creates more orbital debris. So these are problems the United States can't solve alone. We need to solve them with partners. It's called space situational awareness, space traffic management. So that's one key area that is really being focused on during this time. Not so much back in my day. You know, there was less congestion in space back in my day 10 years ago. So that's a big area. Also, how do we work with these other nations as we look to deorbit the International Space Station? You know, we've been living and working in space for more than 30 years as humanity, but the International Space Station is going to be retired in 2030. And so, what NASA's looking at is what are some commercial space stations that could go up in place of that International Space Station? And instead of the US government running that space station with other partner government agencies around the world, we want to commercialize it. And so instead of the US government running it, they're going to be a main tenant of that commercial space station. Kind of like Macy's is a main tenant in a shopping mall. Instead, it'll be the US, and then you'll have Europe, and you might have a university, you might have a pharmaceutical company. So those are some other big areas. Another article I wrote that will come out in about a month or so is on in-space manufacturing and the importance of it. And I tied this article in for your audience who's really interested. October 4th through the 10th is World Space Week. It takes place every year, that first week of October. And this year's theme is living in space. And what I'm highlighting is why we'll be living in space and working in space. And I'm tying it into that International Space Station and that manufacturing in space. There's just so many things we can do in space, in that microgravity environment that we can't do here on Earth.
Truly incredible. Thank you so much for breaking it down for my audience and me, because there's so many different complexities within your field. And when I mean complexities in the context of synergistically, there's so many moving parts and it's not simple. It could be simple in how you explain it, but it's really profound in what you're discussing with us today. And I want to thank you again for your time. This is truly exciting, and it's truly incredible to hear all this about how human beings and how we interact with space and how space is where we operate. And knowing that you've operated in so many different parts of the world. I mean, you've been to India many times, you've been to the Middle East. I've seen you in Africa, just from afar, seeing the different posts on LinkedIn and, just studying your career from afar. We've known each other for many years. And to see that all these different nations, whether developed nations or developing nations, they're really taking an active part in what space and space technology could really do for their countries to improve the lives of the people in their countries, to harness and to be in a position where relationship building, grasping that relationship building concept, because you talk about we're not alone in space. So this is such a timely discussion and really an evergreen discussion because it applies at any part of our lives at any point in our lives. And so if you could speak to the relationship building aspect with these nations, the work that you've done with these nations, and the feedback that you're getting and the conversations you're having, and what matters to them. I mean, I'm sure whether it's the United States, whether it's countries in the Middle East, whether it's India, whether it's China, whether it's countries in South America, Africa, Europe, they all have their priorities of how they want their role to be in space. But are there similarities? Are there differences? Is it like a puzzle piece? Like the US is going to take a position here, China is going to take a position here, the Middle East is going to take a position here. And how are they all interacting with each other where it could be a concerted effort? Because you could be, nation building amongst nations through space. And that's a great way for nations to relationship build, because there's so many other forces working for or against, where countries may have different priorities on so many other range of issues. But when it comes to space, it's the common ground that's really healthy for a fruitful discussion amongst nations.
Absolutely. So there's a lot in your question, so I'll try to break it into segments. I think the first one is what you're talking about is international relations and diplomacy. And so as we talked about space and all these challenges I shared, space does not belong to one nation. So it's run through the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs. There are treaties that have been signed, but many of those treaties, or most of them, are more than 50 years old. So they don't really apply very well to today's market, to what's happening with commercialization. And because of geopolitics, it's very difficult to get any more treaties signed. So, what the US government has done is kind of lead the way with what they call the Artemis Accords, which are kind of guidelines in how signing nations will agree to work together in space so that we can get along in space, low Earth orbit, cislunar economy, which is a new economy, economic market from the Earth to moon. And, it's a cislunar economy as we go on to put research stations and scientific activities on the moon and then onto Mars. How do we work together? So, a lot of activity is taking place with that United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs and working together collaboratively, both on the civil front, the commercial front, and then, as I said, on the military front, like Space Force now has created their formal policy on international relations. Some of the other things you talked about, how are nation states wanting to pursue this? Well, you're in WaveCapital, so you're about money. So let's kind of talk about the money. In 2023, the global space economy was $630 billion. And according to the World Economic Forum, it will grow to 1.8 trillion by 2035, if not sooner. Everything that we're talking about today, and I mean everything, quantum, energy and energy storage, AI, healthcare, manufacturing, all of those things intersect with the space industry, even WaveCapital. If it weren't for space technology, fintech, none of that could exist. So if you're in business and you're not thinking about space, you're already a space business. So you need to bring in that component of how space is enhancing your business. What are the risks? What happens if satellites go down? Right now, every time you go to an ATM, you are connecting with GPS. GPS is kind of the original blockchain because every time you put gas in your car and you swipe your ATM, there's a date timestamp on that receipt, and that is from a GPS satellite. That shows that that transaction was legitimate. If GPS goes down, many of your audience won't even remember the days. You used to have to give your credit card to somebody. They put it in a machine with copy paper, and they used to go shh, shh. And that's how they used to do transactions with credit cards. So all of that automation that we have because of space technology and GPS would go away, and we'd have to go back to manual transactions. So companies in the fintech business, every retailer has to think what happens when our computers go down. How many times have you been in a store and the sales clerk is like, "Oh, our computers are down. I got to do it a different way." So I think we need to think about that training process because what happens if we have a bad day in space and satellites go down? And that affects everybody from the military to, like I said, every retail store in the world. So space is part of our everyday lives. Now, as we pivot, WaveCapital, we talked about what's happening. We're going to grow to 1.8 trillion. Let's talk about those entrepreneurs. Oh my gosh, what an opportunity. I just shared all the technology, all kinds of technology that came from space. Look at all these wonderful little apps on our phone. All of these are possible because of space technology. Uber, Airbnb would not exist without space technology. So if you're an entrepreneur, you don't need to worry about creating the next great rocket or space station. You can look at how space can enable a business for you. And a great place to start with ideation is the NASA Tech Transfer Office. You can Google that, NASA Tech Transfer Office, and they have thousands of patents that are waiting to be commercialized. You can apply for the patent. They even have these great grants called SIBR, Small Business Innovative Research Grants, you can apply for to help you look at commercializing that technology. So I know, Garrett, that's probably way more than your audience needs, but there's so many opportunities whether you're already in business, you want to be an entrepreneur, and for those of you who are like Garrett in investing, there's never been a better time to be an investor in space technology and innovation.
I love your answer. It was well stated. You really broke it down for my audience. I just love the fact that you can draw on so many different examples. And typically, when I ask questions, I mean, they can be multifaceted. But I love the fact that you were able to take each part of my question and really break it down and parse it out for my audience at home, because it's very much a continuous flow of how one subgroup of space interacts or coincides with another subgroup of space in terms of a realm that most people don't think about. But then when you actually have a conversation like the one that you and I are having, people really think that, wow, look at how I'm an integral part of the space economy. And when you think of the sub economies that we have here in the United States, but then you have the overall US economy, and you think about GDP, and you think about how we're trying to bring money into our country, right? Opposed to spending money. I mean, we have a national debt that one day will reach, unfortunately, $40 trillion. So how could the space economy, we hope, how can the space economy reach the fullest potential of helping eliminate that debt, to reduce the deficit? How could that help us from an economic standpoint to well position us as we continue on in the 21st century?
That is a great question. And as I kind of shared with you, what are we projecting the space economy to grow to? $1.8 trillion. But that's not talking about all the space that unlocks other innovation. Like I said, everybody who creates an app, Uber, Airbnb, Lyft, Grubhub. So, entrepreneurs out there, we really need to unlock that entrepreneurship. And a lot of times when people say, oh, space, they put up a barrier and they say, oh, space is great. I love it's history, it's the Apollo era, or it's like you said, it's planets, which by the way, Neil deGrasse Tyson kicked Pluto out. So there's only 8 planets technically, but we'll get Pluto back. I'm sure President Trump will fix that for us. But as we look at it, space is more than histories or memorizing planets. It's really an economic engine. It's an enabler to allow entrepreneurs to create new businesses using space as part of their infrastructure. You know, Jeff Bezos didn't have to create the mail system to create Amazon, which was book delivery. I know your audience who may be younger are thinking, you used to get books in the mail? I know. But it used to be you used to go to stores like Barnes and Noble and sit in there and read books, and then Jeff Bezos made it so Amazon would deliver those books. But he didn't have to create the mail system. And that's how entrepreneurship is today if you want to incorporate space technology. GPS already exists. It's like the roads, it's already there. Eventually, as we look at all these launch rockets putting up new satellites for imaging and data and internet, you don't have to create that infrastructure. It'll already be there as a service. I was talking to Dr. Tidiane Ouattara, who's the president of the African Space Council for the African Space Agency, and he was saying, like in Africa, they're leapfrogging technology. They're not going to lay fiber optic cable to every remote village in Africa. They're going to leapfrog technology by using space innovation and direct to device. So space AI, quantum, those three are so powerful because they allow a leapfrogging of deep technology to innovators so we can leapfrog steps. And countries who maybe, as I talked about, countries who maybe they don't have fiber optic cable, those people who are kind of being left behind in the equator region of the world, they're going to be able to leapfrog technology using space, AI, quantum. And then that's going to unlock a wave of economic opportunity, not only in the United States to look at servicing our debt, but economic opportunity to allow all humanity to arise with economic standards.
Yes, and it's all about lifting people out of poverty. And when you think about the global north and the global south countries, including many countries in Africa, and Africa as a country as a whole is considered to be the global south, although a country like South Africa that has a lot of British influence, they are more advanced than, let's say, other countries to the north. But then you have Egypt and you have other countries in Africa that are, again, further along in advancing society in so many different ways, including, to your point, space. And Elon Musk has been in the news for many different reasons, but for the purpose of this podcast, his role in society, being the wealthiest person in the world. And obviously we know that Tesla or Starlink or other endeavors that he has championed and that he's really overseen, and then him wanting to hopefully get us to, as a society, as a people, to colonize Mars one day. How realistic is that, colonizing Mars? And are there other people in addition to Elon Musk who are having conversations today about what that would look like? What's the purpose of colonizing Mars? Is it going to be gradual? Is it going to be where there are going to be people who are going to be, paying a certain amount of money, or to be on some type of waiting list to spend, maybe an indefinite period of time there, not, an unlimited amount of time there, because they really feel like Mars or some type of colonization, is the future?
Excellent question. So, again, a lot to unpack there. Let's talk about Elon Musk and his vision and what he's created. So, what I want to highlight is everybody looks at Tesla, but at the end of the day, and I'm going to take the robots out that he's also creating that will, revolutionize things on Earth. But when you think about Tesla, it's really a battery and it's energy storage, which is what we need on Mars. Because right now, the battery solar panels that we currently have on Earth and that we're using in low Earth orbit for satellites is not going to be sufficient for humans to be on Mars. We can't rely on recharging solar panels. We've seen several of our rovers that we've sent to Mars. Big dust storms happen that can cover half the planet and last for months. And those solar panels get covered, and then that technology, is not able to recharge. So our current solar panels recharging batteries are not enough. And Elon knows that. So that's part of what really, when you think about Tesla, he's looking at creating a better battery energy storage solution. Then you look at Solar City, right? So again, he's tying it in with the solar recharging opportunities. So we look at how he's creating those components. And then, of course, the big one, SpaceX. How are we going to get there? So he's looking at creating those parts of an ecosystem for Mars. But there's so many more we have to think about. How do we grow food? Well, NASA's looking already, and there are already companies looking at vertical farming, where we can grow food inside, more crops, less water, no dirt. That's how we'd have to grow food off planet as well. What about the human component? There are a lot of human challenges. We are an animal, humans. We were designed to live on Earth. The gravity here, we're protected from, the solar winds that come off and radiation from the sun. We're not going to have all that when we go to Mars. There's going to be challenges. We know when astronauts live on the International Space Station, they come back with challenges because your whole circulatory system, your heart, is dependent on gravity. Men develop eye problems. Women develop osteoporosis faster, which is a weakening of the bones. So there's so many challenges that have to be looked at before we're going to become permanent residents of Mars. Let's go with that. But When we look to extend what we're already able to do in microgravity environments, pharmaceutical development, they're looking at solving cancer, they're looking at osteoporosis, they're looking at curing blindness. There's so many things we can do in microgravity environment. And then we can do more. Then the other side of it is at some point we have to stop taking resources from Earth for space. So NASA calls it make it, don't take it. So we need to leave our resources here on Earth. The biggest thing that takes us to get off planet Earth is getting out of the gravity. But then can we use the materials that are in space to go from there? So one of the big materials that we found on the moon is water because water is H2O. So I could split that. O is oxygen. So now we can breathe. It's water, but also H, hydrogen, can be used for fuel. So if we can get off Earth's planet, get to the moon, we can then look at the moon, then being the launch pad using resources on the moon to get to Mars. And there's already companies on Earth that are looking at doing 3D printing on the moon, using the moon's regula to 3D print facilities with artificial intelligence, robotics, all these things we talk about. So we can't talk about space with all the other emerging and deep technology. So I could keep going on, but hopefully that gives an idea to your audience that yes, this is feasible. Yes, we can do this. Yes, there is a commercial viable part because it has to have an economic component as well as a research and development component.
That's amazing. I just love the fact, again, that you're able to really just bridge from one topic to another for my audience and me, because again, it's all intertwined and there's so many things happening, as we speak that, maybe my viewers or listeners at home wouldn't even know about, but then will come to find when it's public knowledge or when as time goes on, the technologies that are being created today that will be used in the future, then, it's like a continuing effect of every several months, every several years, we're always like innovating. We're always trying to get to that next level of achievement. And it definitely happens when it comes to space technology and when it comes to innovations and when it comes to the modernizations of how, again, countries can interact with each other, how people can communicate with one another, and how all of that mechanisms and the vehicles to be able to do those things, serve greater purposes, whether to your point, curing cancer, or again, just developing so many different types of strategies of how to improve the life here at home for us as humans. And again, never stop dreaming, never stop trying to figure out, okay, what we know about the moon and what we know about Mars at this point in human history, that it takes people like you and others and a global village to say, hey, let's keep going. Let's see how much more good we can do in society and get everybody involved in the conversation. I also want to talk about the books that you've written. What Space Got to Do with It is one of them. The research that you've worked on, what you're most prideful about the research you've done, the articles you've written, and if you could just share some of your intelligence about what your goals are as a professional of what you want to accomplish in the future in the realm of space technology. What are your personal endeavors and how they complement the overall goals of people who love space like you do?
Awesome. Well, I'll kind of break it into three components. The things I do, I'm an author, a speaker, and a futurist. So let's talk about being the author. So a lot of times I'm out speaking, or I have been over years, and people would come up afterwards and say, I loved what you said. Do you have this written down somewhere? Whether it's talking about how do you accomplish your goals or next steps. And so that just spurred in me that I need to start writing this down because I have it up here and I mentor people, but you can only mentor so many people a year. You can only do that. So by writing books and creating workshops, you're able to scale. So just like any other entrepreneur, how do I scale what I'm doing? So by writing it down, I give people those next steps. And I do it just like I'm talking to you. I kind of share my story. I share three global thought leader stories in each chapter. And then I end the chapter with turning insights into action. Like, here are the next steps you could do, just like if I were mentoring you. So this first book is already out. What Space Got to Do with It? 10 Life Lessons for Personal Growth. Has interviews also from 30 global thought leaders. The next book is called What Space Got to Do with It, An Interstellar Guide to Success, and it'll come out October during World Space Week. And that book is really based on the minute I talk about space, we've had a great conversation about space. The next question somebody's going to ask me is, how do I do it? And so I took that question and wrote it into that book with those four components. It's leadership, it's awareness, it's access, and it's action. And that book will come out. It'll also have 30 interviews from global thought leaders. And then the third book is what we talked about, will come out next year, is called What Space Got to Do with It, Out of This World Leadership. So that kind of talks about the speaking and the books. The futurist piece is a lot of what we talked about, space technology. What does the future look like? Shake the crystal ball. And I try to write a lot of articles in my Forbes Technology Council because a lot of times the topics can get very cumbersome. And I call it, people's eyes start glazing over. So you got to really talk in a language that relates to everyday people. And so sometimes in the space industry, we can be a little insular. We're very good at talking to each other, but we also have to bridge that gap and talk to the general public about, just like what you offered me today, the opportunity to share how space is part of your everyday life, how there are opportunities for every citizen, whether you're just making a bank transaction or getting gas in your car, all the way to you want to be an investor or you want to become an entrepreneur. There's opportunities for everyone in the space sector. So I do a lot of that in my articles. I'm doing a great series now with Global Trends Magazine, which is part of the Global Chamber of Business Leaders. And every month I'm coming out with a little article about entrepreneurship. How do we help entrepreneurs as they want to expand? And I'm using space entrepreneurs because everybody only thinks about Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, Richard Branson, but there are so many others solving healthcare, agriculture. Another one we didn't even talk about, we know we need more energy on Earth, especially as we look at quantum computing. A great way space can solve that is energy storage, direct energy, sending up solar panels that can then do it, and it's orbiting the planet and it's direct energy down to Earth. It's limitless. You don't have to worry about nighttime. There is no nighttime once you're off planet. So there's so many solutions that solve our challenges here on Earth. And so the important way is how can I articulate those and share those so that people can feel included in this space journey together? Because you know what, Garrett, we're already in space, traveling on this amazing starship called Planet Earth, orbiting an incredible sun. So you're already in space. Your business is already in space. You might have not known it.
It's really remarkable how, you can think about what you do on a daily basis and you think about, okay, what do I need to accomplish today? You think about your typical routine, taking care of yourself, taking care of your family first and foremost, making sure that you're staying healthy, making sure that you're staying hydrated, making sure that you're accomplishing what you need to accomplish in your professional career, involved in your community, trying to make your life and everyone's life, including in your family's life and your friends as well, how to help people get through their day, how to make a positive impact. But then it's more than just that. It's okay, but then where do you live in your town? Where do you live in your city, your state, your country, your world? And then that next level of thinking and that next level in terms of a community from a national and global perspectives, it's just amazing that we are blessed to be living at this time. And people could say that at any point in history, they were blessed to live in this time. Whomever the greatest theorists were at the time, the greatest inventors were at the time, and we can name so many of them. But it's just interesting because you mentioned being a futurist, and there were futurists even 100 years ago, 300 years ago. And what's so miraculous is that futurists from even a few hundred years ago, as just a half a century before our country became what it was in 1776, when then America became a nation. We're only 249 years old. Next year will be the 250th year. But even our founding fathers and just people who were considered to be the quote unquote futurists, they were ahead of their times because they were able to predict things by the year 2000 that were pretty much accurate. I mean, there were some discrepancies, but they were even predicting people of the 1800s going into the 1900s. They were able to predict things that we might be using in the year 2000 and now up until present day. And it's just amazing. It really is amazing. So the things that you and other experts and thought leaders and people who are experts in your field, as in space and technology and innovation and just the space economy in general, the things that you're talking about, the things that you've done research on, people will be able to look back maybe 100, 200 years from now and maybe say, wow, that person, Shelli Brunswick, from the year 2025, she was one of those early thought leaders. And now in the year, I don't know, in the year 2200, we're actually working on things, and things are being discovered that actually was already discussed at an earlier stage almost 200 years ago. So I think that's how the world works. And I don't know if you share that sentiment.
Absolutely. I mean, we can look back to Michelangelo and the futurist thoughts he had that we're still figuring out how to unravel. But the biggest thing we need to do as we talk about it is how do we unlock the human capital? How do we inspire humanity? And I think that's a component that we need to talk about because we need to bring everyone into this space discussion because we need everyone to be able to help solve the challenges we have on Earth as well as going to space. You know, everybody will say, why do I worry about space when we have problems on Earth? Well, first of all, space is the solution to the problems on Earth. And we need to talk about that so that more people think about pursuing degrees that have a cross section and interdisciplinary action with space. So, is it space in AI, space in quantum, space in healthcare, space in energy solutions, manufacturing, and so on, so that we can look for ways to solve these challenges. So, that's why it's so important. You know, we were talking about your son and going to an amazing preschool and school, that we need to help every citizen around the world find ways to create opportunity, and education is one of those foundations. And now with AI and the ability for AI to greatly enhance education, we can now reach and provide education around the world in a different way and unlock individuals around the world. In my first book, I talk about an individual who grew up in Iran. He was destined to be a shepherd, so taking care of sheep. And what happened was they escaped Iran when the country fell during the Shah of Iran and everything, ended up in America. Turns out he was a genius, got to work at NASA when he was very young, you know, teenager. And now he's looking at education and AI because what he's saying is, think about how many Steve Jobs are out there and how many other people in other countries, these geniuses, but we can't reach them. We need to reach everyone. And by relooking at education and artificial intelligence, we can reach everyone around the world because education becomes the great equalizer. So I share with your audience that there are great opportunities in person schools. There's Khan Academy. I just watched a great show with the founder of Khan Academy talking about how AI is going to unlock even more educational opportunities around the world. You know, ChatGPT, you can't believe everything ChatGPT gives you. You have to research it, but there are going to be more and more applications that help us become even smarter, solve even more problems. But the biggest thing young people have to realize is you need to know how to use Gen AI. It's not just AI. We've had AI for a long time. It's generative AI that's unlocking all that opportunities. I also want to highlight that space and education is one of those areas of diplomacy that every nation can agree to, every citizen. We all realize how important space is, whether it's telecommunications, looking up at the stars, thinking about our place in the universe, or using space to solve challenges here in humanity. And education is the other thing. Everyone wants a better future for their children, just like you do. And so we can come together and talk to even people we have disagreements with to share where we have commonalities. How can we work together in space so it benefits all of us? And how can we create educational programs so we can elevate humanity?
And I really appreciate those closing statements. And you answered my last question. You know, final thoughts on what relationship building means to you in a team environment. And feel free to share thoughts. I only have one more question, and we haven't touched upon the topic of immigration. I know that immigration has been an issue the last 40 years, whether it's undocumented immigrants who live in this country who seek a better life, who seek asylum, and they're protected by our laws when they seek asylum. But I know that this administration has differences of opinion on what or who should be living in our country, whether they're undocumented, or I know the discussion of birthright citizenship, that if you're born in this country but your parents came here illegally, let's say, well, it's always been for a very long time that when you're born in this country, you are US citizens. I know that this administration is starting to test the waters, or have tested the waters on, is it possible to end birthright citizenship? But I feel like this conversation is interesting from the standpoint of, to your point earlier, if the space economy, which is a diverse economy of ideas, thoughts, and opinions and beliefs, and grasping that intellectual capital around the world, people we can't get to. And because the space economy will be eventually able to get to them, well, how can we have other people from other countries who want to come here who are not necessarily citizens who would love to become citizens, but it's these educational programs or these opportunities that will allow them to live here and eventually become US citizens while they need to spend time in America to be able to help impact our society, to be able to, come up with these wonderful discoveries. And again, you talk about the person who I ran who was destined to be a shepherd, and then he ends up getting involved in NASA. So there's so many stories out there. So I feel like even the space economy can touch the immigration issue because we need to have the smartest and brightest people around the world feel that they can find a place in America, that they can freely travel back and forth from their home countries, but they feel that whether they're dual citizens or that they just feel like they need to spend enough time here to be able to feel like they can make an impact here, to your point of how do we connect with those people?
I think that's a wonderful question to talk about. How do we bring more ideas and thoughts into the space economy? And as I said, the space economy is global. And there are two ways to look at it. Yes, the United States has a legal immigration process. We have a lot of people, even Elon Musk, have come from other countries legally through the immigration process and become US citizens. And we need to continue legal immigration to the United States. So we bring all the ideas here. But the other challenge I want to share is many of these nations, these individuals want to take the opportunities of space and develop their nations. So right now there are 95 countries operating in space. So think back 60 years, the Apollo era, two nations in a space race, government workers. Now we have more than 90 nations operating in space. Many more want to operate in space, many more than just government employees. Now we have commercial, civil, international. So it's not only do we want to bring people to the United States, but we want to create more allies and partners around the world and help others. And what other countries are seeing is that the United States is living off of that space technology from the Apollo era, from 60 years ago. FinTech, fire retardant clothing for firefighters and babies, Airbnb. We're seeing all this technology, healthcare applications that have been done, surgery for eyes. Other nations see that development of the US investing in the Apollo program, and they want to see that opportunity as well. So I think what the United States is a great beacon of, yes, we want to bring people here legally to be part of our economy, to be part of our society, but we also want to inspire other nations to create those economic opportunities so people can thrive where they're at and create economic opportunity, and then they can become trading partners. They have economic opportunity. Their citizens rise in economic quality of life. We become trading partners and we're partners. So I think there's a lot of fronts where you look at space, not only for space sake, but space as an economic driver, not only in the United States, but how it can be an engine for the world.
Well, thank you so much, Shelli. I really appreciate the time you spent with me today on the Wave Capital's guest speaker series on relationship building in a team environment. I look forward to having many more conversations with you. Thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. And until next time, I look forward to seeing you around the galaxy.
Yes, I love that. Thank you so much, Shelli. Really appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Take care.